The alarm screamed. Mace Brenner's eyes opened and he was already moving, his hand finding the rifle before his feet found the floor. The bunk's thin mattress had done nothing for his back. The cold had done less. He pulled his boots on and the insulated jacket. It smelled like 3 weeks of sweat and burnt caffeine. The base's lights flickered. One panel in the corridor had gone dark entirely, leaving a 3-meter stretch of shadow between him and the junction. He moved through it without slowing. The bodies of the dark were familiar. The duty roster flashed on his wrist display. Northern Corridor, Close Quarters Defense. Mace stopped walking. The Northern Corridor was a structural weakness. A collapsed section near the power core had turned it into a funnel. Any force pushing through that funnel would have elevation advantage, cover advantage, and a clear field of fire into the defender's only retreat path. He knew this because he had read the after-action reports from the last 4 times the Heliarch had held this moon. He knew this because he had written 2 of those reports himself. He went anyway. Refusal meant court-martial. Court-martial meant firing squad. The Heliarch did not waste bullets on deserters who survived. The Northern Corridor smelled like burning insulation before he reached it. Smoke curled from the ceiling panels near the bulkhead. 3 soldiers were already in position. 2 of them were kids, maybe 20 standard, their faces pale in the emergency lighting. The third was a woman named Daria, a veteran with gray in her hair and dead eyes. Those eyes had been dead for years. She nodded at him when he slid into cover beside her. He nodded back. That was all the communication they had time for. The attack came from above. They breached through the ceiling panels, dropping into the corridor on tethers, their weapons firing before their boots hit the ground. Plasma bolts burned the air. The first kid took a hit to the chest. He was dead before he stopped sliding. The second kid fired blind, screaming, and Daria grabbed him by the collar and pulled him behind the bulkhead. Mace returned fire, 3 rounds, 2 hits, 1 drop. Then the bulkhead gave. The crash was louder than the guns. The ceiling came down in a sheet of twisted metal and sparking wires, and when the dust cleared, the corridor was sealed behind them. They were trapped in a pocket of space 4 meters long. The only way out was through the maintenance tunnel to their left, a crawl space designed for conduit repair, not combat. The second kid was screaming. His leg was open from knee to ankle, a shard of bulkhead metal buried in the muscle. Daria had her medkit open, but her hands were shaking. The bleeding would not stop. Mace looked at the maintenance tunnel. It was too small for a full-grown human to move fast. If anyone followed them in, they would die in the dark like rats. The maintenance hatch opened from the other side. Mace raised his rifle. A Zelix head emerged. Dark chitin, not yet faded to adult blue, with compound eyes reflecting the emergency lights in 1,000 tiny points. The Zelix raised both upper forelimbs in the universal gesture of surrender. Heliarch command codes. The Zelix spoke in rapid clicks, their translator module rendering the words flat and mechanical. Extraction for the entire squad. Safe passage to neutral territory. All Mace had to do was surrender his datapad. The screaming made the choice for him. Mace pulled the datapad from his belt. He held it out. The Zelix took it with a forelimb trembling slightly, and then the maintenance tunnel was full of movement. More Zelix bodies, carrying equipment and stretchers and the sharp smell of antiseptic. The extraction was silent and fast, 43 seconds from the hatch opening to the tunnel closing behind them. Mace did not look back at the Northern Corridor. He did not look at the bodies. He watched the base burn from the cargo window of a Zelix transport. The flames were orange and white against the black of space. The moon's surface was gray and pitted, and the base was a smear of light shrinking as the transport climbed. Mace pressed his cheek to the cold metal of the floor and felt the vibration of the engines through his skull. He felt nothing, a cold relief he was still breathing, that was all. The transport's pilot came back from the cockpit. Young, dark chitin, the same Zelix who had opened the hatch. They sat down across from Mace and tapped their forelimb claws together in a rhythm that seemed nervous. The pilot spoke. The translator rendered it as "You are safe now." Mace did not answer. He stared at the fire. The pilot tried again. "My name is Rylan. I am a logistics specialist. I was not supposed to be on extraction duty, but the regular crew was unavailable." Mace closed his eyes. The cold of the floor against his cheek was the only thing feeling real. Rylan stopped talking. The transport's engines changed pitch. They were landing. Mace opened his eyes and looked at the cargo door. The metal was scarred and dented, the same kind of wear he had seen on every military transport he had ever ridden. He had no idea where they were. He did not care. He wished the transport would crash. The door opened onto a mid-orbit station. The air smelled like cheap disinfectant and ozone, the chemical signature of recycled atmosphere scrubbed one too many times. The station's walls were gray and featureless. There were no windows. Ryland stood beside him, their claws tapped together twice. Mace's wrist display had gone dark. No signal, no network, no Heliarch. Ryland's voice was flat through the translator. The Heliarch has already flagged you as a war criminal. You cannot go home. There is no asylum for your species within the Consortium's neutral territory. But there is one place that will take you. Mace stepped off the transport. The station floor was cold and hard. He had nothing. No weapon, no datapad, no unit, no name meaning anything. He looked at Ryland. The young Zelix's compound eyes were unreadable. The pilot said a world called Sanctuary. It is a new colonial effort under Zelix protection. The Heliarch has no jurisdiction there. You can disappear. Mace felt the word settle into his chest. Sanctuary. The name was a lie. All names were lies. But the cold floor was real and the burning insulation smell was still in his nose, and the hollow space where his loyalty used to be was empty and quiet. He followed Ryland down the corridor. He did not look back at the transport. He did not look back at anything. The only thing ahead was a door at the end of the hall, unmarked and sealed, and beyond it was a world he had never heard of and a future he had no right to want. The office smelled of wet soil. Xylos stood at the glass wall, watching the terraformed valley below. Pale green light from the local star filtered through a haze of atmospheric processors. Construction machinery droned in the distance, a rhythmic pounding that vibrated through the floor. They did not turn when the door opened. Ryland entered with a datapad clutched in both forelimbs. Their dark chitin had not yet faded to the adult blue. They tapped their claws together in that nervous habit Xylos had noted during the recruitment evaluation. The file on the datapad was open to Mace Brenner, standard human, above-average combat record, no notable citations, no disciplinary actions. One trait stood out. 3 engagements. 3 times Mace Brenner survived when his entire squad died. The Heliarch called it a liability. A soldier who cannot hold a unit together was worse than a coward. A coward ran alone. Mace Brenner attracted death and walked away from the wreckage. Xylos turned from the window. Their bioluminescence pulsed a slow amber, steady and controlled. You pulled him from a burning base, they said. Why? Ryland's claws clicked together twice before they answered. He surrendered the datapad under duress. That made him predictable. Predictable humans are assets. Predictable in what direction? Ryland hesitated. The chitin above their iriges shifted, a gesture Xylos recognized as uncertainty. They lack context. We have data on Heliarch tactics, on human military doctrine. But we do not have data on how individual humans break. He broke in a predictable pattern. He chose survival over loyalty. Xylos considered this. The humans called it desertion. The Heliarch would call it treason. But Ryland was not wrong. A deserter with combat experience could provide insight into human military psychology. The question was whether the insight was worth the political cost. The sanctuary world was neutral. The Zelix Consortium was neutral, but neutrality required maintenance. Xylos moved to their desk, a slab of polished local stone. They keyed the datapad and pulled up the symbiont-armor bonding protocol. Conditional residency, they said. He submits to the bonding procedure. If he refuses, we return him to the Heliarch. Ryland's bioluminescence flickered bright. The bonding is permanent. He made a choice in that corridor. He can make another here. Xylos set the datapad down. Schedule the procedure for the next cycle. The hologram flared to life without warning. Hestia Varn appeared in the center of the room, her image fizzling at the edges as the signal degraded through orbital relay. She smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes. Ambassador Xylos, how pleasant to find you in your office. Xylos did not return the greeting. Their chitin plates shifted, a subtle sound like pebbles clicking together. Captain Varn, to what do I owe this interruption? Hestia tilted her head. The motion was slow, deliberate. Her gray-streaked scalp caught the pale green light. I know you have one of my soldiers, Mace Brenner. I want him back. The sanctuary world is independent, Captain. The Heliarch has no jurisdiction here. The smile on Hestia's face did not change. It stayed fixed, a mask painted over something harder. He is a deserter. He abandoned his post. He handed military assets to an enemy combatant. A public trial would be good for morale. It would remind the other conscripts what happens to men who run. Rylan had not moved. Their claws were still pressed against their own thorax. Xylos did not look at them. Mace Brenner surrendered a personal datapad under threat of death. He was not carrying classified material. He was not in command. He was a conscript. The Heliarch defines that as desertion, but the Zelix consortium defines it as a reasonable survival decision. Hestia's smile tightened. The corners of her mouth pulled into something thinner. The Heliarch does not recognize alien definitions of human military law. Xylos stepped closer to the hologram. The light fizzled across their chitin, casting shifting shadows. The sanctuary world does not recognize Heliarch definitions of law. We are neutral. Our independence is charter-protected under the Galactic Council. You know this. Hestia said nothing for a long moment. The air in the room smelled of wet soil and ozone from the projector. The machinery droned on outside. When she spoke again, her voice was flat. I will remember this conversation, Ambassador. I hope you do, Captain. It was very productive. The hologram dissolved. The room fell silent. Rylan exhaled, a soft rasp of air through their breathing spiracles. That was aggressive. Xylos returned to the window. The valley stretched below them, green and patient, full of growing things that had never known war. They had built this place to be a sanctuary. That meant nothing to the Heliarch. It meant nothing to the humans at all. Aggression is the Heliarch's language, Xylos said. I matched their tone so they would understand the conversation was closed. Rylan stepped forward, claws tapping together again. Do you trust them? Number Xylos paused. The pale green light caught the edges of their iriges, and I do not trust Mace Brenner either. Then why keep him? Because I trust the human capacity for adaptation more than I trust the Heliarch's stability. Xylos turned to face Rylan fully. The humans have a phrase. A cornered animal is the most dangerous. The Heliarch is cornered. They lost a base. They lost a conscript. They are looking for someone to blame. Giving them Mace Brenner would only delay the inevitable. The datapad pinged. A secondary file had finished decrypting. Xylos opened it. The iteration protocol log, 42,000 combat simulations, each one built on the failure of the last. The data was compressed, dense, almost impossible to parse manually. But Xylos understood the shape of it. Human recursion. The ability to treat every failure as raw material and revise faster than most species could track. Xylos had studied the phenomenon intellectually for years. They had read the academic papers. They had attended the diplomatic briefings. They had heard the Endari describe it as chaotic, the Gravel Mine dismiss it as inefficient, the Nulvara ignore it entirely as beneath notice. But this was the first time Xylos had held the raw data in their own processing unit. The simulations cascaded. Each one branched from the failure of the last. The humans did not reach peak capability. They did not refine a single optimal approach. They iterated. They revised. They built entire tactical frameworks from the ashes of a strategy that had killed 3,000 soldiers, and then they revised again. Xylos felt something they had not felt in a long diplomatic career. Apprehension. The humans were not a species that reached maturity. They were a species that kept growing. They kept changing. They kept getting better at the only thing that mattered. Survival. Rylan was watching them, Ambassador. Xylos closed the file. The screen went dark. Contact Mace Brenner, they said. Keep him close, not as a guard, as a student. Rylan's bioluminescence flickered uncertain. A student. Learn how he thinks. Learn what makes a human revise instead of retreat. Xylos looked at the glass wall, at the green valley, at the distant construction drones that were building something new. I have a feeling we will need to know soon. The antiseptic hit Mace first. Then the hum of biomonitors, a low thrum vibrating through the gurney and into his skull. White walls, white ceiling, white everything. The smell of something metallic underneath the clean. The symbiont armor sat in a nutrient bath across the room, a pool of liquid gray pulsing like a sleeping thing. The Zelix medical technician moved with mechanical precision. 4 limbs, each one operating independently, one adjusting a drip line while another prepared the application cradle. The technician did not look at Mace. It did not need to. You understand the process, Rylan said from somewhere to his left. The young Zelix stood with their four-limb claws tapping together, a soft click-click-click filling the silence. Mace did not answer. He watched the gray pool. The armor will bond to your spinal column, Rylan continued. It will connect to your major nerve clusters. The technician says the pain will be substantial. She says it is necessary. Everything out here was necessary. The surrender, the extraction, the cold relief of survival. Mace rolled his left shoulder. The old wound ached. Rylan stepped closer, claws still tapping. Why did you surrender your command codes? The question hung in the sterile air. Mace looked at the young Zelix at the dark chitin not yet faded to adult blue. They wanted a reason, a clean answer they could log and file. I got tired of being the one who survives. Rylan's claws stopped tapping. The medical technician gestured toward the nutrient bath. The application cradle lowered into the gray liquid, and the armor began to climb. It felt like warm oil at first. Then it found his skin, and the warmth became heat. The heat became fire. The armor seeped into his pores, threaded through his flesh, sought his nerves like a living thing looking for a home. Mace bit down hard on his lip. The pain was white, pure and total and blinding. His back arched off the gurney. His hands gripped the edges until his knuckles went pale. The armor crawled up his arms, over his torso, across his chest. It breathed with him. It wanted to share his pulse. He did not scream. The metallic taste of his own blood filled his mouth. He held onto that taste. He held onto the concrete fact of it. The pain crested, and then it began to recede, folding back like a tide, proving its point. The armor solidified. Matte gray second skin, warm against his body, alive with a rhythm matching his heartbeat. Mace opened his eyes. The ceiling was still white. The monitors still hummed, but something had changed. Something inside his chest had started beating in a double-time sync. Recovery took 2 days. Mace spent them lying in the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the armor adjust to him. It would tighten around his ribs when he breathed too deep. It would loosen across his shoulders when he relaxed. Learning him, mapping him, becoming him. Rylan visited every shift. They talked about nothing important, the weather on the sanctuary world, the food synthesizer on the 3rd floor, the way the Zelix designed their medical beds to cradle a different skeletal structure, and how Mace's lower back kept cramping. Small things, safe things. On the 3rd day, the siren sounded. It started low and rose fast, a pitch sliding through discomfort into genuine pain. The Zelix had designed it to unsettle every known species. It worked. The sound crawled under Mace's skin, and the armor answered, tightening across his chest in a reflexive guard. Rylan burst through the door, claws clicking in a rapid staccato. The Nulvera, a void walker, has detected the world. Mace sat up. The armor moved with him, responsive and immediate. The Nulvara were a species existing as pattern disturbances in space-time. They moved through solid matter like light through glass. A void walker was one of their agents, a living distortion able to pass through walls and scan every molecule in a room. How? It found us, that is all we know. The Zelix emergency protocols have no effect. The void walker is not a ship. It is a pattern. It passes through matter like water. The armor tightened again, then relaxed. A response to his adrenaline spike. Learning his fight response, adjusting to it. Mace felt something flicker in his chest, something that was not shame, something that was not hollow. A problem he could solve. The cold clarity settled over him like a second skin. He swung his legs off the bed and stood. The armor locked into his posture, perfectly balanced, perfectly weighted. It felt like an extension of his own body, like he had been wearing it for years. "Get me to the command center," he said. Rylan hesitated. Their claws tapped once, twice, then stopped. "You are not cleared for." "I need to see what we are dealing with." The words came out flat and final. Rylan stared at him for a long moment. Then they turned and led the way. The corridors of the sanctuary world were chaos. Zelix technicians ran through the halls, their bioluminescence flickering in panic patterns. Light pulses of orange and red that Mace could not read but could feel. The siren cycled through its unsettling pitch every 30 seconds. The air smelled of ozone and fear. The command center was a domed room at the heart of the compound. Holographic displays ringed the walls, each one showing the same image, a distortion in spacetime looking like a wound in the fabric of reality. It was large, it was old, and it was getting closer. Xylos stood at the center of the room, 4 upper limbs gesturing at the displays. Their chitin pulsed a slow blue, controlled and deliberate. "Ambassador, this is a survey pattern. The Nulvara do not communicate. They harvest." Harvest what? Mace said. Xylos turned. Their heads swiveled to track the sound of his voice. Biological samples, cognitive data, everything living on this world will be collected and analyzed. The Nolvara do not kill intentionally, but their process of collection is not gentle. Mace looked at the distorted shape on the displays. The pattern was massive. It filled the system like a slow storm. The numbers scrolling beside the image meant nothing to him, but the trajectory was clear. It would arrive in 20 hours. Your protocols, Mace said. What do they recommend? Xylos paused. Their bioluminescence flickered through a sequence that might have been embarrassment. We have no protocols for the Nolvara. They are not hostile. They are not diplomatic. They are simply present. So you wait. We observe, we document, we survive as best we can. Mace felt the armor pulse against his ribs, a slow, steady beat matching his own. It was learning him, and he was learning it. The cold clarity sharpened into something like a plan. The iteration protocol log, he said. Where is it stored? Xylos's head swiveled again. The facility's hardened data core, sublevel 7, why? Mace did not answer. He turned to the display and studied the pattern. The Nolvara did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They harvested. But harvesting required collection, and collection required proximity, and proximity meant vulnerability. The problem was not military. It was logistical. The Nolvara were not a threat they could fight. They were a threat they could outthink. Get me to the data core, Mace said. Ryland stepped forward, claws clicking. What are you planning? Mace looked at the wound in space-time. The pattern pulsed with a slow, patient hunger. It was old. It was patient. It had never encountered a species treating failure as raw material. He smiled. It was not a warm expression. I am going to make this thing learn. The command center hummed with the sound of processors and the soft, nervous clicking of claws against the deck plates. Xylos stood at the central holographic display, their 4 upper limbs braced against the console's edge. The air cycled cold from the cooling systems, but the chill did not touch the fear pooling in their thoracic cavity. The Nolvara pattern hung in the air before them, a slowly rotating sphere of static. Raw data resolved into image, a patch of forest, 200 kilometers from the colony, dissolving. Trees collapsed into gray dust. Soil turned to vapor. Small creatures, burrowers, and nesters were caught mid-motion. Their bodies unraveled into threads of organic information. The pattern absorbed everything, converted it, stored it. Xylos tapped a claw against the console. 10 cycles until the leading edge reached the colony perimeter. 10 cycles to evacuate, to negotiate, to find something the Nolvara would accept as trade. They had nothing the Nolvara wanted. The command center's rear display flickered to life. Hestia Varn's face resolved in harsh blue light. She stood in what looked like a Heliarch briefing room, arms folded, gray-streaked scalp catching the glare of overhead lamps. You have a problem, she said. Xylos did not turn. Your observational skills are remarkable. I have a solution. Hestia's smile did not reach her eyes. We have a Void Cloak-equipped scout ship in orbit, fast, small. I can lend it to you. One approach run, one disruption device planted in the pattern's core. The Nolvara will disengage and retreat. Ryland stepped forward from their station. And the cost? Hestia's smile widened. Brenner returns to Heliarch custody after the operation. That is the price of the ship. Silence filled the room. Xylos could hear the click of Ryland's claws tapping together, could sense the fear bleeding from every staff member in the chamber. They turned to face the hologram. No. Hestia's expression did not change. Ambassador, your idealism will kill everyone on this world. The neutrality of this sanctuary is non-negotiable, Xylos said. Brenner remains here. Neutrality is a luxury you cannot afford. Hestia's voice dropped. The Nolvara do not negotiate, they consume. I am offering you a way out. Take it or burn with the rest. The offer is refused. Hestia's hologram flickered once. She held Xylos's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then the image dissolved. The command center fell quiet again. Mace Brenner stepped forward from the shadows near the door. Xylos had not seen him enter. The symbiont armor covered his arms and neck now, a seamless dark gray weave that moved with his muscles. He looked at the holographic display, looked at the static sphere, looked at the timer counting down. Give me the Void Cloak, he said. Xylos's head swiveled. What? The Void Cloak, a collar, not a ship. Mace pointed at the display. I can get close enough to see what it is actually doing, then we decide. The cloak is untested on humans, Xylos said. The dimensional shift may not be compatible with your neurology. You could be trapped in the pocket space permanently. Unreachable. Unrecoverable. I know. Rylan stepped forward. Ambassador, his plan has merit. We have no data on Nulvara behavior at close range. All observations are remote. If we can see what the pattern is doing at ground level, we may find a diplomatic angle. This is not a diplomatic problem, Xylos said. It might be. Rylan's claws clicked faster. We do not know, and we have 10 cycles to find out. The only alternative is Hesja's offer, and we already refused that. Xylos stared at the display. The pattern rotated, static. They looked at Mace. He was not afraid. His heart rate was steady on the biomonitor. His breathing was even. The armor shifted subtly across his skin, responding to his calm. Why? Xylos asked. Mace rolled his left shoulder. Because I survived 3 battles while my squad died. That is all I have ever done, survive. Maybe I can use that for something else. Xylos held his gaze for a long moment. They gave the order. The void cloak collar was a ring of black metal, cold to the touch, with a single activation stud on its inner surface. Mace placed it around his throat without hesitation. The technician ran the calibration sequence. The room held its breath. The collar shimmered. Mace Brenner vanished. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then a faint heat distortion effect appeared at the edges of where he had stood. A shimmer, like the air above a hot road. The biomonitor flickered, a steady heartbeat, a calm breathing rate. I am still here, Mace's voice came through the comm, distorted, thin, like he was speaking from very far away. I can see you, I can hear you. Xylos let out a breath they had not realized they were holding. The command center watched the biomonitor as Mace walked toward the Nulvara pattern. The march took 40 minutes. The display tracked his position as a moving dot against the static sphere, approaching. The pattern did not react. It could not see him. Xylos stared at the display. The Nulvara were one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. They existed as pattern disturbances in spacetime. They could detect any material object, any energy signature, any biological function. But they could not detect a human wearing a void cloak. Mace Brenner walked into the center of the static sphere. The pattern did not change. No alarm, no defensive response, no awareness at all. Xylos felt something cold settle in their thorax. The humans had a technology the Nulvara could not detect, and Mace was using it not to fight, not to attack, not to destroy. He was using it to observe, to gather data before engaging. The human instinct to collect information was not a military tactic. It was cognitive. It was the recursion. Every failure fed the next attempt. Every observation shaped the next decision. They did not charge into the unknown. They studied it. They tested it. They broke it down into components and rebuilt it into something they understood. And then they acted. Ambassador, Mace's voice came through the comm, thin and distant. I found something. Xylos leaned forward. Report. It is not collecting samples. It is building something, a structure. A pause, the sound of distorted breathing. Xylos, this is not a survey, this is construction. The holographic display changed. The Nulvara pattern stopped rotating. It began to move faster. The static sphere contracted. The colors shifted from gray to deep violet. The leading edge accelerated toward the colony. It knows something is there, Rylan whispered. It cannot see him, but it knows something is wrong. Xylos stared at the accelerating pattern. The timer reset. 4 cycles. 3. The Nulvara were not retreating, they were coming. The void cloak hummed against Mace's skin, a vibration settling in his teeth. Every step through the Nulvara pattern felt like wading through deep water. The air was thick and charged, and his hair stood on end from the static. The ground beneath his boots was neither solid nor liquid. It shifted with each step, a mosaic of organic tissue and mineral crystal rearranging itself in slow, rhythmic patterns. No visible source of light. The illumination came from everywhere at once, a gray twilight casting no shadows. Mace kept his breathing steady. The collar around his throat was warm. It was holding. He moved deeper into the structure. The lattice rose around him like a spiral staircase built by something not understanding right angles. Harvested biomatter clung to stone in strips, veins of blue and green pulsing with slow light. The smell was damp and metallic, like blood left too long in a closed room. At the center of the spiral, he found the core. It hung in the air, a sphere of concentrated light the size of his fist. But it was not light. It was information, pure data compressed into a density making his eyes water. The surface of the sphere rippled with symbols he could not read, patterns shifting too fast to track. This was the heart of the Nulvara's survey. This was what the Void Walker had been building. The pressure changed. It came as a drop in temperature and a sudden weight behind his eyes. The air smelled like ozone. A voice resonated inside his skull, not through his ears, but directly into the meat of his brain. It had no tone, no gender, no inflection. It simply existed. "What are you?" Mace stopped walking. His hand drifted to his belt where the dream projector sat in its leather pouch. Small, cool to the touch. He had not told Xylos he was carrying it. He had not told anyone. He did not answer. The pressure increased. His ears popped and a dull ache settled behind his jaw. The void cloak flickered. For half a heartbeat, he felt the pattern around him as texture against his skin, wet, cold, alive. Then the cloak reasserted itself and he was hidden again. The third vigil spoke again. It was the consciousness of the Nulvara pattern, a cognitive entity existing across the entire lattice. Its voice carried something beneath the flat resonance now, something like irritation. "You are not a void creature. You are matter, solid. Why can I not perceive you?" Mace kept his mouth shut. He studied the lattice. He traced its structure with his eyes, following the curves, the connections, the way the biomatter fed into the central core. It was not random. It was designed. The spiral was not a weapon. It was an amplifier, a cognitive amplifier. The Nulvara was not building something to destroy the sanctuary world. It was building a mind large enough to process the entire survey, a mind that would digest the data from every world the Nulvara had touched and return it as pure understanding. The third vigil was not a scientist collecting samples. It was a fetus building a brain. The pressure spiked. Mace's vision blurred. The void cloak screamed in his ears, a high-pitched whine cutting through his skull. The collar vibrated against his throat and the air around him shimmered. The Nulvara was not attacking. It was expanding. The pattern was growing thicker, denser, and the pocket dimension of the void cloak could not keep up. He had seconds. Mace reached for his belt. His fingers found the leather pouch. He pulled the dream projector free, a cube of polished obsidian, cold and heavy in his palm. His thumb found the activation surface. He pressed. The world dissolved. The dream projector did not generate a visual display. It generated a space made of Mace's mind, his memories, his fears, his regrets. The Nulvara pattern was flooded with it. The barracks on the night before his first deployment. The smell of boot polish and stale coffee. The sound of a man crying in the bunk below him. The face of Daria hollow-eyed as the bulkhead collapsed. The face of the kid who died first, his mouth still open in a scream never finished. All of it poured into the lattice at once. The third vigil recoiled. It was not a physical movement. It was a contraction, a withdrawal, a sudden retreat of pressure leaving Mace gasping. The voice in his skull fractured into a dozen overlapping fragments, each one trying to process the flood of human cognition. What is this? This is not data. This is noise. Why is there pain in the noise? Why is there joy in the same signal? This is not coherent. This is. The lattice cracked. Mace saw it happen in slow motion. A fissure ran up the spiral and the organic matter slewed off like dead skin. The crystal beneath fractured and the central core flickered. The dream projector grew hot in his hand. Burning circuits, the smell of scorched plastic. But the projector was not the only thing burning. Mace felt it in his own skull. The feedback loop. The dreamscape poured through the projector into the Nulvara pattern, but the pattern pushed back, and the void cloak destabilized between them, and the symbiont armor responded to his panic. It pulsed against his skin, warm and alive, trying to protect him from a threat it could not understand. 3 systems, 3 layers. Human mind, Nulvara pattern, void pocket. They were resonating. Mace became aware of himself as a node in a circuit. His thoughts were not his own anymore. They were being pulled outward, amplified, broadcast into the lattice. He could feel the third vigil trying to understand him, trying to categorize him, trying to file him away as a known pattern. But there was no known pattern. Human recursion, every failure became raw material. Every mistake was fuel for the next attempt. The Nulvara processed data in straight lines. Humans processed data in spirals, in loops, in contradictions. They revised faster than any species in the galaxy. They treated every defeat as a lesson and every lesson as a weapon. The third vigil could not process it. The lattice shattered. The core flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The pressure vanished. The gray twilight collapsed into a point of black, and Mace felt himself fall. He fell through nothing. The void cloak was gone. The dream projector was gone. He could not feel it in his hand anymore. The air rushed past him, cold and thin. He was in normal space. He was falling. The sanctuary world spun below him, green and blue and white, getting closer. His ribs hit something, not the ground, something soft and warm. The symbiont armor had wrapped around him, a cocoon of living gray sealing itself over his face, his arms, his chest. He could not breathe. He could not see. But he could feel the armor contracting, hardening, preparing to absorb the impact. The wind screamed. The ground rushed up. And then nothing. Xylos watched the descent from the command center. The display showed a single human-shaped object falling through the atmosphere at terminal velocity. The symbiont armor had wrapped into a dense ball around the body. It would survive the impact, mostly. But there was no way to catch him. Rylan stood beside Xylos, claws clicking together in a nervous rhythm. The young Zelix stared at the display, their bioluminescence flickering pale and uncertain. Xylos said nothing. They watched the falling object grow larger, closer to the valley floor, closer to the impact point that would leave a crater and a broken human. The third vigil had withdrawn. The pattern was gone. The sanctuary world was safe. But Xylos knew, with a certainty settling into their chitin like cold water, that the human should not have survived that encounter. And they had not yet seen the worst of it. The medical bay hummed with a sound Rylan had learned to hate. A low, failing drone from the biomonitors, a wet rattle in the air recycler. The smell of burnt electronics and antiseptic clung to every surface. Mace Brenner lay on the table. His symbiont armor had shifted from healthy gray to a pale, sickly white. It looked like milk that had gone bad. The living metal had pulled back from his face, exposing skin that was gray with exhaustion and something worse, something dying. Rylan tapped their forelimb claws together. Click, click, click. The sound was the only thing they could control. The armor was failing. It had kept Mace alive through re-entry, through the vacuum of short exposure, through the backlash of the dream projector collapsing a Nulvara cognitive lattice. But the damage was too deep. The bond between host and armor was degrading cell by cell. Rylan checked the readout again, 43% bond efficiency. At 30%, the armor would begin rejecting the host. At 20%, the host would begin rejecting the armor. At 10%, both would die. They had maybe 6 hours. Xylos stood at the door. They had not entered the room. Their bioluminescence pulsed slow and dim, a deep amber that meant something between mourning and calculation. Rylan did not look up. Ambassador, there is a procedure. Xylos tilted their head. Their compound eyes caught the monitor light and scattered it. The Heliarch keep medical protocols in their iteration log. Brenner's body recorded the data during every engagement. Yes, you want to use Heliarch medicine to save a Heliarch deserter. Rylan finally turned. They met Xylos's gaze. I want to use anything that works. Xylos said nothing. Their bioluminescence flickered, but they did not leave. Rylan accessed Mace's datapad. The iteration protocol log was encrypted, but the medical subroutines were open. Standard field triage protocols. The Heliarch expected their soldiers to get hurt. They expected them to need patching up so they could be sent back to die again. The procedure was buried in trauma response protocols. It was not a treatment for the armor. It was a treatment for the host, a direct neural transfusion from a clone vat. Grow a blank body, harvest its neural scaffolding, feed it into the host's nervous system. The armor would use the fresh tissue to rebuild its bond. Rylan stared at the screen for a long time. A clone vat, a blank body, a thing grown to be taken apart. Xylos spoke from the doorway. The moral weight of creating a clone to harvest is unacceptable. Rylan's claws clicked once, twice they stopped. I know, Ambassador. And they walked past Xylos into the corridor. The mass cloner was in sublevel 3. It was a small unit designed for crew replacement in emergencies. The Zelix did not use it much. The concept made them uncomfortable. A body grown from nothing, programmed with basic motor functions, ready to have its neural architecture stripped and transferred. Rylan activated the unit. It hummed to life, a low vibration that traveled up through their legs. A blank human body began to grow in the tank. 12 hours. Rylan watched it for the first hour, the shape forming in the murky fluid. Arms, legs, a face with no expression, a body that had never drawn breath and never would. They felt something twist in their thorax, something that felt like the death of their own optimism. They went back to the medical bay. The procedure took 40 minutes. It was crude. The Heliarch had designed it for field conditions, not surgical precision. Rylan followed the steps as the blank body was wheeled in on a gurney, its skin pale and wet, its eyes closed. The neural transfusion was pain. Mace woke mid-procedure. He screamed. It was not a human sound. It was something raw and animal, a noise that came from a place beyond language. His body arched off the table. The symbiont armor flared white, then gray, then white again. The monitors shrieked. Rylan did not stop. They could not stop. If they stopped, both of them died. They injected the pain medication. Mace's scream cut short. His body went slack. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and Rylan saw something in them that they would never forget. The look of a man who had been taken apart before, who knew exactly what was happening, who had expected it. The armor stabilized. The color shifted from white to a pale, uncertain gray, then to a shade that might have been healthy. The bond efficiency climbed to 62%, then 67, then 71. Rylan stepped back. Their forelimbs were shaking. Mace lay still, his eyes closed, his breathing even. The clone body lay in the corner of the room, covered with a sheet. Its neural scaffolding was gone. Its brain was empty. It would never wake. 3 days passed. Mace recovered. He ate when food was brought. He drank when water was placed in his hand. He did not speak much. He did not thank Rylan. He did not need to. The silence between them was enough. On the 3rd day, the door opened, and HFY walked in. She was smaller than Rylan had expected. Human female, late 40s, gray streaking a close-cropped scalp. She wore a Heliarch uniform with rank insignia that caught the light. She smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes. She looked at Mace. He looked back at her. Neither of them moved. "You are a tool," she said, "and the Heliarch needs its tools back." Mace said nothing. Behind her, the door opened again. Xylos entered. Their bioluminescence was steady, cold, a flat, clinical blue that Rylan had never seen before. "Mace Brenner is under Zelix protection," they said. Their voice was quiet and precise. "The Heliarch has no jurisdiction here. If you try to take him, you will be treated as a hostile force." Hestia's smile faded. For the first time, she looked genuinely angry. The command center stank of burnt ozone and fear. Holographic displays ringed the walls, each one showing a different angle of the same nightmare. A Nulvara fleet hanging in the void above the sanctuary world. Dozens of them, maybe more. The sensors could not get a clean count. The patterns kept shifting, folding in on themselves like light through broken glass. Mace leaned against a console. His symbiont armor still felt wrong along his ribs, tight and hot where the new tissue had bonded. 3 days since the transfusion. He should have been in bed. He should have been dead. Xylos stood at the central display, their bioluminescence a flat, dim gray-blue. The usual pulse was gone, replaced by a steady glow like a pilot light about to go out. Rylan sat at a secondary terminal, claws tapping against the interface in a frantic, uncontrolled rhythm. They had not stopped working since the first alarm sounded 12 hours ago. HFY was the only one who seemed comfortable. She stood with her arms crossed, back straight, watching the screen like a woman watching a storm approach through a window she knew would break. "We have one option," Xylos said, their voice carrying none of its usual diplomatic polish. "We open a channel, we attempt to negotiate." Hestia laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "You think they negotiate? They don't. They observe until they understand, and then they consume." "That is not," Rylan began, looking up from the console. "I have seen it," Hestia cut in, her voice dropping. "On Cleaver's Rest, on the stone fields of mourning, the Nulvara do not come to talk, they come to watch. And when they finish watching, the planet goes quiet. Your sanctuary will be a trophy display in 14 hours. The room fell silent. The hum of the displays filled the space. Mace pushed off the console. His legs shook. He ignored it. "She's wrong." Hestia's eyes snapped to him, cold and sharp. "Excuse me." Mace did not look away. They don't consume, they learn. He stepped toward the main display, pointing at the sensor feed. The Nulvara fleet sat in a perfect spiral, a formation that looked almost organic. I was inside one of them. I watched it try to understand me. It couldn't process recursion. It couldn't handle the speed of revision. I broke its pattern with a few memories and a civilian-grade projector. Hestia's jaw tightened. That was one. There are 43 up there now. And they can only learn at one speed, Mace said. One cognitive thread at a time. They don't multitask. They don't parallel process the way we do. Everything goes through a single analytical pipeline. He turned to look at Xylos. We can drown them. Xylos' head swiveled, tracking him. How? The iteration protocol log. The words hung in the air. Hestia's arms uncrossed. Her face shifted, not to surprise, but to something harder, colder. That is a classified military asset. That data core contains every engagement simulation generated by Heliarch forces in the last decade. 42,000 iterations. 44,711, Mace corrected. I checked the manifest before I surrendered my codes. Silence again. Then Ryland spoke, their voice careful, almost afraid. If we broadcast that data across the Nulvara network, the volume alone would saturate their processing capacity. They don't have a buffer. They can't queue information. They process one thing at a time until it is fully resolved. The third vigil called a single human memory pattern noise, Mace added. Noise is just data without a filter, a signal the receiver can't align with any known schema. Hestia stepped forward. You want to hand them our tactical playbook? Every strategy, every failure, every countermeasure we have developed in 300 years of warfare. They can't learn at our speed, Mace said, holding her gaze. They watch, they analyze, they find the pattern, then they act. But the pattern is recursive, it changes. Every simulation revises the assumptions of the one before it. By the time they parse iteration 1, iteration 41,000 already exists with a completely different solution set. This isn't a data leak. This is an overflow attack. Hestia studied him, the silence stretched. You're insane. No, Xylos said, they are correct. Everyone turned. Xylos' bioluminescence was pulsing now. A slow, steady rhythm, green. The recursion is the weapon, they said. Xylos looked at Mace, and for the first time their expression was not one of curiosity or fear, but of profound understanding. The noise is the signal. Get me the data core, Mace said. We need to broadcast now. Rylan was already at the console, claws moving faster. It's on sublevel 9, hardwired. We have to extract the data and convert it into a transmission format compatible with. Do it, Xylos ordered. Every second we wait, they get closer. The extraction took 6 minutes. The Nulvara fleet continued its slow approach. Mace watched the data stream scroll across the screen, a river of failure and correction, faster than his eyes could follow. 44,711 ghosts of battles that had never happened, and of battles that had. Ryland's voice broke the silence. Transmission ready, targeting the fleet's cognitive array. Once I send this, there is no taking it back. Xylos looked at Mace. Mace nodded. Send it. Ryland pressed the activation rune. The displays flickered. On the main screen, the Nulvara fleet stopped moving. The perfect spiral held for 3 seconds. Then it began to unravel. One pattern contracted into a bright point of light and winked out. Another fractured into a cascade of static. A third began to spin, faster and faster, its edges blurring until it looked like a vortex. They're receiving, Rylan whispered. They're processing. One by one, the Nulvara winked out, collapsing from the inside, drowning in information they could not file. The process took 47 minutes. By the end, the void above the sanctuary world was empty. Just the cold stars and the dim light of the local sun. Rylan slumped back in their seat. It worked. Hestia stared at the display, her face blank. You weaponized your own failure. We weaponized our ability to learn, Mace said. Xylos had moved to the room's single viewport, looking out at the valley. The construction drones had resumed their work. The air smelled of soil and life. The Nulvara will recover eventually, Xylos said. They will adapt. They will develop new processing architectures capable of handling recursive data. By the time they do, Mace said, joining them at the glass, we will have revised. Xylos turned. Their bioluminescence pulsed slow and steady, green. Yes, they said, I believe you will. The command center settled into a quiet hum. The threat was gone. The sanctuary remained. Mace stood at the viewport, feeling the armor pulse with his heartbeat, warm and alive. He thought about the next time. The Nulvara would return. The Heliarch would try again. The universe would keep throwing problems at this small world, and the people on it would keep revising, keep failing, keep learning. That was the only thing he was sure of. And that was enough.